What's up everyone, I'm Aldrich, bringing you your daily dose of donkey, and it is once again Saturday, so we're talking about the Camelot Unchained class reveal that happened yesterday. Now before I begin, I would like to say that I'm going to slightly change how exactly I talk about these class reveals, because I just felt that going into so much detail on every single ability was maybe a bit too boring. So I'm going to talk a little bit more generally about the classes and what I think they are supposed to do, and I'll highlight some of the important abilities with their implications, but I'll focus a little bit more on the overall speculation. And then at the end of each of these, I'm going to tell you which class in my opinion is the coolest out of these three, and we'll keep a little bit of a scorecard throughout the weeks just to see which of the faction wins the most of these trios. So this week's reveal was for Trio A, which turned out to be the heavy fighters, the tanks. From what we've learned in the Kickstarter campaign and during the batshit crazy days, we know that tanks are very much supposed to be about tanking first and foremost. They of course have to be able to deal some damage so that in situations where you don't really have any tanky things to do, you still have some use for the group, but if you could also be an amazing damage dealer, then who would need any of the damage dealing classes? Tanks will have abilities to protect their teammates and to annoy enemies incessantly. So we're talking ability disruption, cripples, knockbacks, maybe even stuns, all of that sort of short duration crowd control that people find really annoying and niggling and that might get them to actually attack you. And that's the entire point of a PvP tank. You're trying to get people to attack you, not because you just taunt them and force them to attack you, but because you are so incredibly annoying that they choose to attack you. Also, since pretty much everything is supposed to be some kind of physics projectile, you'll be able to block stuff by just moving in the way. So if some archer fires an arrow at your mage, you could just step in the way and raise your shield, and goodbye arrow. Now let's look at them individually. For the Tuatha Danann, we have the Fiona. In Irish legend, the Fiona were a band of stalwart elite warriors led by the very prominent and popular Finn McCool. The Fiona in Irish legend were perfect warriors as perceived by Celtic society, which meant they were incredibly fierce and skilled warriors, apt at using the spear, the shield and the sword, but at the same time they were really good people, willing to help others. And to not just be boastful and boisterous, but to actually be capable of backing that up with deeds. It's something you'll find all throughout Celtic mythology. Bravery, honesty, but also modesty were very important values in Celtic society. In Camelot Unchained, the Fiona will apparently focus very heavily on the wind spear as their weapon, which I'm very happy about because I love spear and shield as a weapon combination. And they apparently will also focus on war cries. One example that we can see here, Warcry of Finn combined with Second Wind, will actually heal the Fiona over a short duration. At the same time, they're apparently not supposed to wear the super heaviest of armor, which makes them a little bit more of a sustain tank. Now sustain tanks are generally those that don't have the highest of defense, which makes them a little bit weaker against burst damage, but if they can survive the initial burst damage, they're much more likely to survive incredibly long fights. Now burst damage is always a very popular strategy in PvP, so when playing a Fiona you're gonna have to be a little bit more careful. You're not gonna be able to just run in there like the Black Knight might be able to, but instead you'll have to be smart about how you engage the enemy. And also the smaller the engagement size, the more powerful the Fiona is going to be, because smaller number of enemies means less burst damage possibilities. And so being able to constantly heal yourself back up is going to put less strain on your healer, and it's going to keep you in the fight longer, and it's going to make it really difficult for the enemy to take you out at all. As I said, Spear and Shield is one of my favorite weapon combinations in RPGs, and sadly it is also the most underused weapon combination in RPGs. Ever since World of Warcraft, spears have pretty much always just been two-handed weapons. The only game in recent memory that made specific use of Spear and Shield is Lord of the Rings Online with the Warden class. And it's a very cool Spear and Shield class, but I'm definitely happy to see that there is a class in Camelot Unchained that makes use of this awesome combination. Next we have the Black Knight for the Arthurians. The Black Knight of course has its roots in Arthurian legend, and it was a popular story all throughout medieval times. The Black Knight also definitely has its influences from the Fae of Celtic mythology. Evil dark riders are a very popular theme in multiple Celtic societies. Figures such as the Dullahan and the Nucalavi come to mind, although the Black Knight is of course not quite as scary as those. In Camelot Unchained, the Black Knight will apparently focus the most on heavy armor and defense, as well as overwhelming the enemy with shield charges and a lot of crushing damage. Crushing damage being the type of melee damage that does not need to penetrate the armor to do damage, and as such being of course very good against heavy armor. And so the Black Knight will probably also find his niche as sort of an anti-tank tank. Now, the Black Knight isn't necessarily something that we've never seen before. This sort of really heavily plate-armored sword and board tank is a rather popular theme in a lot of fantasy games. But that doesn't mean it's bad. There's still a lot of people who really like this kind of class. I mean, I would totally play a Black Knight if I was a dirty, stinking Arthurian. There's definitely something to be said about big, stumpy sword and board tanks. It's not for everyone, but what class really is? The Black Knight is definitely going to be the strongest against burst damage, which means he's also going to be an excellent initiator, just being able to run in and not having to worry about the consequences too much. He's really the Eric Cartman amongst tanks. Respect my authority! And being this big and awesome protector guy who everyone really loves when you save their precious little faces from being singed and cut. And then lastly this week we come to the Viking version of the heavy fighter, the Mjolnir. Now Mjolnir is not a person from Germanic mythology, it is actually Thor's hammer. And let's be clear about this, I'm not talking this drink, I like it, another! Cultural appropriation Thor, I mean actual Thor, son of Odin and Jörd. And depending on who you ask, god of thunder, storms, rain, weather, oak trees, and generally beating the ever-living hell out of trolls, giants, and any other beasties threatening his buddies the humans. In some Germanic regions, he was so incredibly popular that his worship became almost monotheistic. And I guess it kind of explains why he makes such a good superhero. Because his character in the mythology kind of fits the description of what Marvel and DC Comics think about as superheroes. And I generally don't mind that much because hey, at least it keeps the stories alive for the next generation. But seriously Marvel, making Thor a title? Thanks for dicking around with ancient lore, you pricks. Ever heard of respecting the subject matter? I mean, what if I went and declared Jesus a title? I crown thee Jesus. Now fetch me some fish and wine, you son of God. See how stupid that is? In Camelot Unchained, however, the Mjolnir appears to be a little bit more on the offensive side, with a lot of his abilities focusing on just dealing more damage and going in with a big smashy hammer. I mean, one of the abilities, Empowered Hurl, even lets you throw the hammer and has it return to you. How freaking cool is that? Now it's going to be interesting to see how the Viking realm can manage without having a huge stumpy defensive heavy fighter. Don't get me wrong, I love the idea of the Mjolnir, and it is of course very thematic to have the Vikings be all about the smashing, but how are they going to fare against the other two realms if they both have really good defensive tanks? But I guess that just remains to be seen. Theme-wise, there's nothing wrong with the Mjolnir and it's really cool, and there is something to be said for playing a devotee of Thor. And now let's come to the score. Who wins the trio? Because this is the first time I'm doing this, I'm also going to do week 1 and 2. It's actually very difficult for me to choose a winner in week 1 because to me personally, both the Abbot and the Blessed Crow really stand out as just being super awesome and unique. Now don't get me wrong, thematically the Hellbound is a quite cool class, but ability-wise it didn't really present anything that I haven't seen in a million other games before. Whereas the Abbot with his dual flail or staff wielding, lightning striky, beer drinking goodness, and the Blessed Crow with dropping his cauldrons and using them as origin points for his spells and being basically a death healer, the Hellbound just doesn't quite measure up to how awesome those other two are. And in the head-to-head battle between the Blessed Crow and the Abbot, I'm gonna have to give the point to the Abbot, even though I'm probably gonna be more likely to play the Blessed Crow because he happens to be on my realm. In week 2 it's a little bit more easy for me to name a winner, because while I like the general theme of the Blackguard and the Winter Shadow, none of them come close to the cool theme of the Forest Stalker. A gardening archer that spreads plants around that attack the enemy, that is just so awesome. So week 2 absolutely goes to the Tuatha de Danann. And week 3, well duh, obviously the Mjolnir. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Fiona and the Black Knight both seem really fun and they're classes that I would be just as willing to play. But the Mjolnir is just so awesome and it is so iconic, especially if you have played Dark Age of Camelot, because it totally invokes the Thane from Midgard. So after week 3, all 3 realms have 1 point and are head to head, and we'll just have to see who gets the point in week 4 and who carries it away at the end. But how about you tell me in the comments what you think the best class reveal was? And if you have any feedback, you can leave that too. And that is it for your daily dose. I seriously can't wait for the next class reveal. Friday is so far away. But until then, I've been the Cloaking Donkey, and I'll see you in another video.